August 6, 1997, Macworld Expo, Boston. Steve Jobs, back at Apple for less than a year, stands on stage. The company is 90 days from bankruptcy. He needs a miracle. And then he announces the unthinkable, a partnership with his greatest rival. On the giant screen behind him, the face of Bill Gates appears. The crowd erupts in boos. It looked like a surrender, the pirate king kneeling before the emperor. But what if I told you this moment of humiliation wasn't a defeat? What if it was the single greatest strategic move of Steve Jobs' career? This isn't just a story of rivalry, it's a story of how two men, a hippie and a nerd, fought, stole, and collaborated their way into building the modern world. Our story begins not with hate, but with a weird kind of seduction. In the early 80s, Microsoft was a key partner, making software for the Apple II. Steve Jobs, in his signature sales mode, flew to Washington to pitch Bill Gates on making software for a secret new project, the Macintosh. Gates was unimpressed. He later described the meeting as a weird seduction visit, where Steve was saying, "We don't really need you, but I might let you be involved." Despite the awkwardness, Gates saw the potential. He even appeared in a cheesy dating game video for Apple employees praising the Mac. For a brief, shining moment, they were allies, working so closely that Gates joked he had more people working on the Mac than Jobs did. And then came 1985. Microsoft announced its own graphical operating system, Windows. Jobs was apoplectic. He screamed at Gates over the phone, accusing him of theft. "You're ripping us off," he yelled. Gates, ever the pragmatist, remained calm. He knew that neither of them had invented the graphical interface. They had both seen it at a legendary research lab called Xerox PARC. This led to one of the most famous exchanges in tech history. When Jobs accused him of stealing, Gates fired back. "Well, Steve, I think it's more like we both had this rich neighbor named Xerox, and I broke into his house to steal the TV set and found out that you had already stolen it." The gloves were off. The war had begun.
Let's dive deeper into the lawsuit that defined their early conflict. In 1988, Apple sued Microsoft for copyright infringement, claiming that Windows 2.0 copied 189 different elements of the Macintosh's look and feel. It was a high-stakes legal battle that would drag on for years. Apple believed they owned the very idea of a graphical desktop. Microsoft and Gates argued that you can't copyright an idea, only a specific implementation. And since both companies had been inspired by Xerox PARC, Apple's case was on shaky ground. The court ultimately agreed with Microsoft. In 1994, the final ruling came down. Apple could not claim a monopoly on the desktop metaphor. This legal defeat was a devastating blow to Apple, but a monumental victory for Microsoft. It cleared the path for Windows to become the undisputed standard, cementing its dominance for the next decade.
The rivalry quickly became personal. Jobs called Gates unimaginative and said he had no taste. He famously quipped, he'd be a broader guy if he had dropped acid once or gone off to an ashram when he was younger. Gates in turn called Jobs fundamentally odd and weirdly flawed as a human being. The personal animosity between the two men was a reflection of their company cultures. Apple, under Jobs, was a cult. It was secretive, elitist, and obsessed with design. Employees were pirates and artists on a mission to change the world. Microsoft was a machine. It was pragmatic, aggressive, and obsessed with market share. Employees were brilliant, but they were soldiers in an army, fighting for every inch of territory. This cultural clash was perfectly captured in their advertising. Apple's famous 1984 ad, directed by Ridley Scott, portrayed its users as rebels breaking free from a dystopian, conformist world, a clear shot at IBM and, by extension, Microsoft. Microsoft's ads, on the other hand, were often clumsy and focused on features, not feelings. They sold software. Apple sold a dream.
But beneath the insults, there was a deep, grudging respect. Gates admitted he was jealous of Jobs' natural charisma and presentation skills. After seeing Jobs rehearse, he said, "I'll never achieve that level." He called Jobs a wizard at motivating people. Jobs, for his part, admitted he admired the company Gates built. It was a complex relationship, part rivalry, part envy, part admiration. While Jobs was focused on creating insanely great products, Microsoft was focused on world domination, and he was winning. In 1985, Jobs was forced out of Apple, the company he co-founded. He went on to start Next, a high-end computer company. But Microsoft, with its strategy of licensing Windows to every PC maker, was building an unstoppable monopoly. By the early 90s, Windows was on over 90% of the world's computers. Apple, without Jobs, was lost. They released a confusing array of products, lost their creative spark, and by 1996 were bleeding money. The company that had started the PC revolution was on the verge of collapse. In a desperate move, Apple bought Next in 1996, bringing Steve Jobs back as an advisor. When Bill Gates heard the news, he tried to talk the Apple CEO out of it. "Don't you understand that Steve doesn't know anything about technology?" he argued. "He's just a super salesman." But it was too late. By 1997, Jobs had maneuvered his way back to the top, becoming interim CEO. He found a company in chaos, just 90 days from bankruptcy. He needed cash, he needed stability, and he needed to end the legal wars with Microsoft. So he picked up the phone and called his old rival. This brings us back to that fateful day at Macworld. The booing crowd saw a surrender, but they didn't see the full picture. The deal wasn't just about the $150 million investment. It was a masterstroke of strategy. First, it ended the costly patent lawsuits, freeing up resources. Second, it guaranteed that Microsoft would continue making Office for Mac for 5 years, which was critical to keeping Apple's professional user base. Third, and most importantly, it sent a message to the world. If Microsoft thinks Apple is worth investing in, then maybe we're not dead after all. It was a vote of confidence from the most powerful company on the planet. But there was a fourth, hidden benefit, one that only Gates and Jobs understood. Microsoft was facing a massive antitrust lawsuit from the U.S. government. By saving its only major competitor, Microsoft could argue that it wasn't a monopoly. The $150 million wasn't charity, it was self-preservation. The 1997 investment wasn't just a financial lifeline, it was a psychological turning point. For years, the Mac community had defined itself by its opposition to Microsoft. Being a Mac user was a statement. It meant you were different, creative, not part of the herd. The sight of Bill Gates on that Macworld stage felt like a betrayal. One fan even heckled Jobs, yelling, "You're a sellout!" But Jobs, in a moment of remarkable candor, explained his new philosophy. We have to let go of this notion that for Apple to win, Microsoft has to lose. The era of competition between Apple and Microsoft is over. He was signaling a shift from a war mentality to a survival mentality. He knew he couldn't beat Microsoft at their game, so he had to create a new one. With Apple stabilized, Jobs began his legendary second act. He ruthlessly cut products, focusing on just 4. He launched the iconic Think Different campaign. And then, in 2001, he changed the world with the iPod. When Gates saw the iPod, he sent a panicked email to his team. "Jobs has us a bit flat-footed again. We need a plan." But Microsoft's Zune was too little, too late. And that new game was digital media. While Microsoft was busy defending its Windows monopoly, Jobs was looking at the next frontier, music. The iPod wasn't just a beautiful piece of hardware. It was part of a seamless system, the iTunes software for managing music and the iTunes Store for buying it. This was Jobs' genius, the integration of hardware, software, and services into a single, elegant experience. Microsoft tried to compete with its Plays for Sure platform, a confusing mess of different devices and stores. It was the open model versus the closed model all over again, and once again, the closed, integrated model won. The iPod didn't just save Apple. It transformed it from a computer company into a consumer electronics giant and set the stage for the iPhone.
Then came the iPhone in 2007 and the iPad in 2010. Jobs wasn't just making products, he was creating ecosystems. The integrated approach of hardware, software, and services, the very thing Gates had criticized, was now Apple's greatest strength. The tables had completely turned. Microsoft, the giant, was now seen as slow and bureaucratic. Apple, the near-bankrupt underdog, was the most innovative company in the world. Jobs, ever the showman, couldn't resist the few final jabs. He called Microsoft irrelevant and said they made crappy products. He even criticized Gates for his lack of creativity, saying he was more comfortable in philanthropy than technology.
But in their final years, the feud softened into a friendship. Gates visited Jobs at his home during his final illness. They talked for hours about their families, their lives, and the incredible journey they had shared. In their final years, as the rivalry cooled, both men reflected on their legacy. Gates, having stepped away from Microsoft to focus on the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, found a new purpose in solving the world's biggest problems. Jobs, facing his own mortality, cemented his legacy by ensuring Apple would continue to innovate after he was gone. In a way, they both achieved their ultimate goals. Gates, the pragmatist, had a massive positive impact on the world through his philanthropy. Jobs, the artist, left behind a company that continues to shape culture and technology. So who won the war? In the short term, Gates and Microsoft dominated. They won the battle for the desktop. But Jobs and Apple won the war for the future. They won the battle for mobile, for music, for our hearts and minds. The rivalry wasn't just about market share. It was a clash of philosophies. The pragmatist versus the perfectionist. The businessman versus the artist. The open model versus the closed garden. And the truth is, we needed both. Gates' open model put a computer on every desk. Jobs' closed model showed us what that computer could be. Beautiful, intuitive, and magical.
Their feud wasn't a zero-sum game. It was a creative force that pushed both men and humanity forward. As Jobs himself said in their final joint interview, quoting a Beatles song, "You and I have memories longer than the road that stretches out ahead." Their story teaches us that success isn't a single destination. It's a long, winding road with room for more than one winner. What do you think was the most important moment in their rivalry? Let us know in the comments. And for more stories about the feuds that built our world, subscribe to Rise and Ruin.